Welcome to all the watercolor painters joining me here today. This is Deborah and I have another watercolor project for us today. We're going to be painting California poppies. I already have mine traced onto my watercolor paper. So let's get started on this fun and colorful project. Thanks for joining me here today. So we're going to be starting our California poppies project today. This is the handout, and I already have it traced onto my watercolor paper, and I have my color chart all put together here. So we're going to be using all of these greens in our foliage. I always put black in just in case we might need to have a little bit of that. And then I have some beautiful warm colors here, and I'm putting a little opera in just to bring a little more spice into this cadmium scarlet. I also have rose doré on here. It's very similar to the scarlet, so if you have one or the other, you can decide which one you like better. So let's get started, and I do have my colors mixed up in my palette, but we're going to start by doing a wash on our painting here. And I'm going to wet both sides of my paper. I'm going to start with the back, so I'm really saturating it. And one of the things I like about this, now I'm working on a piece of glass so that my paper won't be moving around, at least while I'm doing this wash. So getting it pretty wet. You want to get both sides wet. I've just found that works the best. So now I'm going to flip this over and wet this side using a large brush here. Getting everything nice and wet, so hopefully it won't dry as I'm working my color in. Just watching those edges, a lot of times they like to dry before the rest, so that's why I'm going over this so many times. It looks like it's pretty well saturated now. So I'm going to start dipping into my color, and I have some cad yellow light here, and I want to be careful with that. It's pretty intense pigment. So I'm watering that down, and I'm going to go ahead and bring some of that into my poppies. Getting all of these petals. If it goes outside a little bit, not a problem. Now I'm going to start going into my variety of greens, and I have this celadon color that I've mixed up with some turquoise, green gold, a little Windsor blue, and some white. Right now I'm going to just water that down and just start placing it around the edges of my flowers. Now I'm going to get some of this olive green that I've mixed up with some quinacridone gold. Again, I want to make sure I water that down. And I'll drop some of that in here as well. And I'm letting the water on the page, help move that color around. Trying to stay away from the flowers. I'd rather not have that green inside my flowers. I'm going to grab a little more of that celadon color. I love the way it's looking. Coming up close to the edges of the flowers. A little bit more of that. Now, depending on the intensity of color, I always find this tends to, dry back quite a bit. I'm going to take a little bit of my green gold at this point and just add that in here and there as well. Just breaks up the color in the background and makes it more interesting to have more than one flat color in there. And I think that's looking great. And I feel like maybe I'll just leave that now, and I'm going to let it sit for a little bit until the sheen comes off of it, and then I'll dry it with the hair dryer. And I want to remind you, whenever you're drying your painting, you want to be drying both the front and the back. So it's important to get both sides. And your painting isn't completely dry until it doesn't feel cool anymore to your touch. I'm just going to grab a little bit more of that Celadon. And that could be that the cad yellow is kind of keeping that green from getting inside those flowers. But I like it. That's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and let that dry, and we'll come back and start painting in our flowers and our foliage. The thing I wanted to mention here is also, I like to lift this off of my glass, and I'm actually going to put the glass off to the side, and I'm taking a couple of paper towels, and I like to just put my painting down onto the paper towels so it can absorb some of the extra moisture before I get around to drying it with the hair dryer. So take a moment to do that as well. When our background is completely dry, we can start to go in and start bringing some color into these beautiful flowers. So I'm starting with some cad yellow light. I'm going to be moving that around to different areas. And I do want to wash that in, so I'm taking some water and just softening. Trying to leave a few little white spaces. And this I'm just softening over, this as well. Might lift a little in here. It's pretty light right at the top here. Now I can go into my cad yellow, that's the deep, and bring a little of that into these petals. And along the edge here is very light, so I'm going to try and maintain that lightness there. Working into my cad orange now, dropping that along the edge of this petal that's below, as it starts to get darker towards the center of the flower. And then I'll take some water. Pull some of that color up to the top here. I don't want too harsh a line, so I want to soften that in as well. Keeping this wet as I work my way over, I'm going to drop a little more of my cad orange in here. And I have the option of adding more color at this point, or I could also go back and glaze in some more color when this is a little drier. I'm going to bring a little more of that lighter yellow over here. Nice. I'm going to grab my Cad Scarlet mixed with Opera and just bring a little of that down here as well, right along this ruffled edge, just up to this point. Now it has started to dry, so I'm going to just clean my brush and get a little more of that cad orange and start gradating those together. And now I'm just going to take some water on my brush and I did leave that little area light right here that I will go back to. I'm going to drop just another little bit of the cad orange at the top here. There. Now we have to work on something that's not touching that petal. I'm going to work down here into this curled petal, and I'll start with a little of the cad yellow deep on the outside edge. It's a little more in shadow here. Getting some cad orange. And again, there's a little lightness on this edge of the petal that I'll try to maintain. I'm going to be getting my deeper color now. And I'm bringing that in the direction of the veins, but doesn't necessarily mean I will be keeping them that way. It's nice to get a little feeling of movement by keeping some of those white spaces in there. And again, I'm going to just drop a little extra of that in. Again, I want to keep this lighter, so I'm going to lift a little and taking a little more yellow to hold that space. And also down here, I'm going to drop that in. Nice. And I think we could go into this petal here. We're going to start with the cad yellow light. Now I want to make sure that my pencil lines aren't too dark when I start working on my painting. So you can always do a little erasing before you get started. Again, I'm pulling those lines down in the direction of the veins in the petals. And now I'll get the cad yellow deep. I'm just going to gradate the colors down. Here's the cad orange. Make sure I'm staying within this petal. Can always clean that up when I get to that point. A little bit more of that. A little more yellow on this edge. I'll drop a little more of that lighter yellow. Then I'm lifting a little. It's pretty light on this edge and it has a little glow to it, so I'm going to try and maintain that. And so I can drop a little more of my cat orange towards the base here. And now I'll take the deeper color, the Scarlet and Opera, and drop that into the base here. Let it flow into the cat orange. And I think we'll just leave that at this point. That's looking good. Moving over to, let's actually go over to this flower. We'll start working on this outside petal. Again, keeping some of that lightness at the edge, using the lightest color in this palette, the yellow, and then taking the little bit deeper cat yellow. Has almost an orange tint to it. Now I just want some water on my brush, and I am using a number 10. These flowers are fairly large. I feel like I can work with a little bit bigger brush. And again, I can lift a little along those edges, even dropping a little water in to move some of that paint. Now I'm going to be getting the cat orange. Pulling that up to the edge in some areas. Letting its intensity fill out some of that petal. And again, it's light over here, so let me try and maintain that with a little of this lighter color, and now I can go into the deepest color here. And I do have some stamens here at the bottom. I'm just leaving a little space for those. I'm wanting a little more yellow right here. Sorry, orange. I meant cat orange. Pulling up that red. And a little water and a little dry brush can help lift some of that color. I feel like I would like a few more veins on this edge here. I'm using the cat orange. And I think at this point everything's starting to dry, so we'll let that relax while we move on to this petal over here. Now this is the medium yellow. Painting around the stem of this flower. And just bringing a little of that to the other side here. That petal, taking some water and just softening that in so that we don't get a hard line. And I'm going into my cat orange now. I'm taking a little water, and this little edge is very light. It's a curl. I'm going to soften that as well. Around this edge of this flower is pretty light. The other thing with watercolor, it's better to work light. You can always get darker, but it's much more difficult to lighten things up if they get too dark. So now I'm going to take that deeper, richer color up in here. Again, I want to keep that light. And in fact, I can always blot that with the edge of a paper towel to keep it from absorbing that color. And I can always go back into it later and add some more paint. Lifting a little here. I think that's looking pretty good. So, oops, just one more little blot here. Now we can move over to our other flower. Now this flower is not quite as highlighted, so I'm going to be starting with my cad orange. I'm just coming to this edge. There's another petal behind there that I will paint in later. I do want a little of the cad yellow at the edge here. Again, there's a little bit of a glow. And now, well, I went ahead and finished this petal, and so we're going to move down here to this bottom petal, and it's fairly glowing. So I'm taking some of that cad yellow light, and I'm going to bring it all the way around. I'm kind of just a little bit away from the front edge of that. And now I'll get the darker cad yellow, start to work that into that first layer. And in fact, I'm going to put a few veins down here towards the edge. And now I'll take my cad orange bring it all the way up here. And just some water now. Again, trying to maintain that lightness on this front edge. Lifting a little if need be. I might pull a few veins down. Let's see how that works. I'm going to take a little bit more of this light yellow in here. Pretty much the orange seems to have taken over. I'm going to take a little more of that cad orange and put a few veins coming up. And now I want to get the deeper color. There's not a lot of it here, but towards the back edge of this petal. and on this side as well. And I'll be wanting to work that in, so I'm taking some of my cad orange and moving it across here. Using that to bring a few vein lines in. Give it that feeling of curling. And we'll be adding some of those later as well. I'm going to take my damp brush and lift right here. Yeah. And maybe right here as well. Nice. We'll see how that dries. Hopefully you don't get a bloom. It's all wet enough, but you never know. All right, now let's go back to this petal. Again, I'm going to go right in here with the cad orange. And then I'm grabbing my deeper. So let's get some more color into our petals, and we'll move over to this one using our lightest yellow. Get some of that down at the top here. And then again, gradating the color down, so using the deeper cad yellow. Now I'm going into my orange. Right up against that front petal there of this flower. And then into my mixture of scarlet and opera, keeping that space for my center. It's fairly dense in here color-wise, so I can make this pretty intense, and I will add a little more opera, I believe. Let me try that. And let me pick that up. I just put a little water on there and blot it before it dries. Now I can see that this is already starting to dry, so I want to drop a little more paint in here so I can get it to gradate a little more. And in fact, maybe I'll pull some of that up and make a few veins in here. Sometimes I like to just tip my paper and see where that paint might want to go. I'm going to go back in and drop a little more of the yellow, the darker yellow. And this is already dry, so I want to get that wet again. So that's good. Now we can move up to this top petal, which is very light, so I'm using the lighter yellow and leaving a little more space here to show the structure of the petal. And I'll go into the deeper yellow. cat orange. Coming up from the bottom here, I'm defining the edge of that ruffled edge of the petal in front of it. Working my way over. Maybe not filling it in completely. And I'm going to keep this lighter back here. And I'm going to pull that color up into my yellows that are hopefully still wet enough to move some of that color around. Just going to soften that, getting some clean water on my brush. And that's looking great. Okay, so I don't see quite as much of that red, but I'm going to just put, just the tiniest bit down here in this corner, all the way over to that little ruffle. And I think I'll just leave it at that. Coming over here to the edge of this again. So I start looking back at what I've done and just, always assessing what it may need or what I may need to subtract. So into the deeper yellow now, coming down towards the center and then the cat orange down here. It's not really reflecting so much of the warmer red color. So I'm just going to leave it at that and possibly, add more later if I need to. I'm getting some of my medium, or the deeper yellow. Into the orange. This back edge is quite orange. There. I think I'll take just a little of the light yellow and drop it in there. Nice. I do feel that this could use a little pick-me-up. I'm just going to put a little color in on the edge. This is the lighter yellow. And then maybe the medium. See if I can get a few more defined veins in there. That looks wonderful. And I may have to go in here and do a little glazing, but I'm kind of getting a feel for how all of these are working together. Let's go ahead and, I don't want to work on this one because there's this wet paint around there, so I want to wait till that's a little drier. And I do see that I could use just the tiniest touch of that red right here. So let's see how that works, and then we'll move over to this flower. And I'm going to start with a little of my orange, but I will be bringing the red in here because it's actually a little darker on that back edge. So let me go ahead and get that deeper color on here. And I'm going to just bring it up around this edge here. And then working into my cad orange. I'm going to kind of work away from that to start. And then bring those together. Getting some of the deeper yellow and kind of working away from that orange to start and then bringing them together. I just love the gradations that you can get. And now, since that's wet, I don't want to work on either of those, so we'll move over to this one. And in here, I'm going to start with that lighter yellow. I might even just bring a little in there just to see how that works. I think you could use it. Anyway, we'll go back to that. To the deeper yellow. The edge of this petal is pretty light, so I'm going to try and leave it that way. Cad orange. Just getting that feeling that there's some curving in our petal here. And I'll likely go back in here and add more veining to, my petals later. I'm going to add just a drop of my warmest color here. I'm going to bring it over a little further. And then I'm going back to my cad orange to help gradate that up into that petal. And I got a really nice glow on here. So mostly we have those done. We'll work on these last couple. Let's go ahead and work on some of this greenery. Making sure I have my greens all in order here. So I'm using a little olive with some green gold in it. And under this little cap, it's always going to be a little more in shadow, so maybe I'll take just a drop of my green with the hookers. And then back to this other mixture. And in fact, I'm going to take a little of my green gold. And it's going to bring a little shadow to the side here. And I can always lift a little to show a little highlight. I'll just leave that as is and work with it some more later. I would like to do this bud here, so I'm going to start with the celadon color that I mixed up earlier. In fact, I'm going to drop just a little of that in here as well. Yeah, that's good. So starting with that celadon over here on this bud. And then I'm going to go into that deeper green that has the hookers in it and drop that on what I'm calling the shadow side of this bud. And then on the other side, I'm going to take that green gold and kind of working away from what I already have down there. Trying to get a nice curve at the bottom. And then I can just take some water and mix those towards each other. And at the very tips of these, It's actually a little pink, so I'm going to take actually another color that I don't think I actually put in my palette choices, but I'm going to use a little bit of permanent rose. Let's see how. Yeah, that's good. And it's really just at the very tip, so you don't want too much of that in there. I think I do want to lift a little here. I feel like that is not quite the right shape, so I'm going to correct that. There you go. And I'll go right down here to the stem. Again, a little shadow. I'm going to drop a little more. Actually, I'm going to try a little more of that celadon over here on the shadow side. And then there's another bud here, so I'm going to just stop my stem. We can start bringing some color into our foliage here, and some of these little fronds have that warm color. So now the background is dry and I can start working a little bit more on my foliage. So I'm going to, once again, I'm starting with that celadon, and this is another bud over here. That was celadon. I'm putting in some of the green gold here. And I'm using the deeper mixture with the cookers. And I'm dropping in just a little bit of cad yellow here to lighten up this reflective side, and I'm going for my little bit of warm color for the tip. And then just dropping a little more green in to integrate those colors. I'm going to go right down to the stem of that bud. Dropping a little darker color underneath for the shadow. And a little lift to try to keep a little highlight over here. You can even drop a little water in. Let that move your paint around a little bit. And I'm going to start working over this way. Starting in with that celadon color. So I'm not certain if you can see my pencil lines here. They are pretty light, so I'm actually referring back to my handout. I'll drop a little green gold in here. Looks like a little bit into my bud, which is going to give me a little bloom there, so I'll see if I can soften that. I may have to work in a little bit more color later. Let me drop some of that darker color in and see what happens. It might go into my foliage, but that worked. And in fact, I think I'll just drop a little of this into my foliage here. And I'm going to get back to my warm color, just the tiniest bit. Nice. And just continuing with this foliage on this edge. Going from color to color. This is the green gold now. I drop just a little more of that celadon in here. I just like the variation of color. And I'm going to get these two little leaves in. That's my green gold, and then the pink, the permanent rose. Just a hint of that in the tips here. And here we have another bud. So I'm working that celadon into the green gold. Again, I want to get my shape right and back to the deeper color. Now I did get a little bloom here, so when that's dry, I'll show you how I'll fix that. I'm going to lift a little here so I can drop my pink in. A little more of that darker color. I'm going to go over to this area here. Speaking of integrating, all my colors are working themselves together in my palette. And I have another one down here. Stopping at that stem. And then dropping in a little of the green gold here and there. And since that's dry, I'm going to just drop a little bit more of my celadon in. And the pink. There we go, let's mix that. So I just wanted to mention also, if when you're doing that initial wash, you can also add that orange color in while everything is wet and integrate it that way. Now we have our stem. And always, again, a little shadow. You can always add a little, as I said, the cad yellow will kind of hold the space if you're trying to get a little more of a highlight on there. There. So I'm going to go over to this other side, or maybe up here at the top, while that dries. And work on these at the top here. So I'm liking the way the celadon and green gold are working together. So I'm just going to continue with that. Oops. There's the green gold. Our little pink tips. There's another little frond here. I feel like I want a little bit of the deeper color. I might be able to drop some in here and there. We'll see if I get a bloom. And then again, I'm going to get those little variegated points on here. Now just looking down here, I feel like I could use a little more depth in here. So I'm going to bring a little bit of my darker color. Maybe put a few veins in here. This is a little green gold. And you could do that also on your stems if you want to bring just a little more color to the shadow side. And I'll usually let that sit for just a moment. And then I'm going to bring a little cad yellow in there. Gets a little bit more of a glow. Let's do that on this one. I can actually leave a little space down the center. And then just take a damp brush and pull those together. There we go. Nice. Now I do paint all the way to the edge of the paper, but if you were framing this, you would lose about, you know, a 1/4 inch on these sides and a 1/2 inch on the other sides. But it gives you some space in order to get it matted. And the final matted size of what would be showing would be 8 by 10. So this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet. I'd like to go ahead and finish up these petals, or at least get some more color on there. So I'm going to be working with my Cad Yellow Deep. I'm going to mix just a little of the lighter yellow into that, kind of a combo of those two. And we'll go over to this petal. And on this edge, it's very light, so I'm just going to put a little water, just got a little bit of that color on it, softening these edges. And then I'm going to go into my Cad Orange. And then I'm going to pull that color up from the base. And I will be adding some of my deeper color in here. Pulling this up from here. Now the edge of this petal in front really is glowing, so I want to define that edge. And I'm going to pull this down in between here. And while this is still wet, I want to blend that. I'm going to do just a little lifting here. And just a little of the light yellow over here, maintaining our highlight on this petal. And I want to get back into this with my deeper color. Again, that's the Cadmium Scarlet with some Opera, that beautiful hot pink color. And going in between these petals. I'm leaving a little space right here that's a little darker, so I will add that in a little later when this is dry. Whoops. Just see if I can lift that. I'm going to come up a little higher with this color. I'll just drop the teeniest bit right on that ruffled edge. I do want a little more Cad Orange in here. Dropping just a little bit more of this at the bottom here. So our flowers are really starting to glow a little bit more, and let's go over to this flower. Now this part of the flower here is pretty light, it's pretty glowing, so I'm going to add a little of the Cad Yellow light in there when this is dry. Although I see I might have missed just a little corner here. Let me add that in, see if I can get that without having a bloom. There we go. A few more veins in there. Let's go in here. This is pretty orange, this petal. Let's just bring our cad orange in there. And just the tiniest bit of the deeper color at the base of that. Put a little more orange in there. There we go. And I will bring that little piece of the petal up and around later. Now I'm going to go in the center section. I'm going to start down here. So this I want to be a little deeper, if possible, than this petal next to it. So I'm using a pretty good amount of this intense value. I'm going to come up here and even around this edge here and go right into my cad orange. See, I've left a little space right on the edge of that petal where I'm going to bring in the cad yellow deep. So again, I'm working that away from that. I might even make a few veins. And then I'm bringing those together. Trying to maintain that glow, and so I think I'll, drop a little of the light cad yellow in here as well. I need to kind of square this up a little. There we go. I'll just bring this warm color up a little higher. There we go. Nice. So you can see how the color does dry back considerably, so we can go back in and I'll pump it up a little bit later on. So I'm just going to continue painting my foliage. Now we've completed most of the greenery in the background. I see a couple of blank spots, and there's a chance I might bring something else in there. But I wanted to go ahead and paint these little collars, I guess, on the base of these buds. It's making them a little darker on the edges. And a little highlight in the center. So I just put that color at the edges and bring some water in between to pull them together and make that little highlight. And if it gets a little too light on the edges, I can just drop in a little more color. So down here under this flower, I did already do this one over here, which, I could maybe use just a little more color at the edge. Again, just softening that in. And this one doesn't show on this flower, so we have another up here. And just again some water in the middle. And you can see sometimes I just drop some water in there, and so I'm going to go ahead and finish this bud, starting with that celadon, going to the green gold, lifting some of that moisture and getting my darker color to drop in on this edge here. I'm getting the pink to put in the tip. A little bit more intense pigment in. And I did want to show you, I got a little bloom on this one, so I'm going to turn my paper so I can get at that. And I'm just taking some water on my brush, and just depends on what color you're using. If it's something permanent, you might not be able to move that, but I was able to get that up. And now I might even drop a little bit more color on this shadow side. I just want to block this a little better, and then I'm going to bring some of the green gold back in there. Nice, that worked. So I think I'll also bring some of that darker color just to the edge here. And again, I'll be softening that in, taking some water, just give a little more presence to these buds. One more here. and some water to bring that together. And I can also, I'll do a little bit more on that one. I'm going to take a little of the green gold here because this is pretty light. I think it could handle it. And while that one's still wet, I think I should go ahead and drop in more of this as well. But I always want to keep an eye on it, make sure I'm blending it back in. So that looks good. I feel like I could use maybe one more bud here or another one over here, maybe another frond. I'm going to think about that. And let's work a little bit more on our petals. So I want to bring some of that light cad yellow into this little section of the petal here. And when that's dry, I think I will go ahead and make this section of that petal a little darker. And I am going to be bringing some veins into the petals as well. I'm still looking at, what kind of shadows some of these have that I might want to add in. So I'm taking my cad orange here. Trying not to make them too evenly spaced. And I'm going to take a little of the warm red and even bring some of those up and down. Maybe a couple of them come up a little higher. And I think I'm going to soften that in, and also that. That's looking great. I want this to be a little more orange. Just a little more red here where it's a little more shadowed. I'm going to take just some of that opera and drop it in the base of this flower and pull that up too. Nice, yeah. So here I feel it needs to be a little more filled in. So I'm kind of mixing my cad orange and my red to go in here, making a few marks, which I will definitely soften in. And I'm going to drop some water right there. And I want that to be a little more orangey yellow, so I'm dropping some of that deeper yellow in there. I think that'll give it a little more of a glow. Now down here is a very dark area. I'm going to use that permanent rose, see if that will fill in sufficiently. I think it will. I'll see how it dries and if it needs to be punched up a little. Actually, let me make it a little smaller. I'm going to go for some alizarin. Let me try that instead. Alizarin crimson. There. I think that's probably a better choice for that space. So we're starting to bring a little more detail into our petals. So I'm going to go up here taking a combination of the cad orange and the cad yellow deep, and I'm going to, first of all, make sure I'm not putting my hand in anything, which I think I just did right here. So let me pick that up. I'll fill that back in later. So pulling some veins down. I'm going to go into the light cad yellow and just not fill the whole thing, but just give it a little bit more of a glow. Now I'm not opposed to using some white as well, so I have some white gouache. I'm going to mix it in with that light yellow and make sure this isn't too wet, but sometimes I like to go in and put some extra veins in with a little highlight to make it stand out more, but not here. And I'm going to go over to this petal, and now I'm using a little more of the cad orange with the warm red mixture. Pulling some down and then some up, and well, that looks great. So here I feel this needs a little work before I can put those veins in, so I'm taking that same mixture I'll go ahead and pull some veins up, couple down. There we go. That's looking nice. I want to keep that highlight, so just washing that in and maybe lifting a little there. I'm using the cad orange now. Let's look at this petal in the front. So I want it to be a little lighter here, so maybe a little more of the cad orange and the cad yellow deep. Trying not to make things too consistent. And sometimes I like to turn it around and get a better angle on it. Just getting some deep cad yellow here. It's looking nice. In the center, we have our pistils and stamens. I think I'm going to start in with some of my mixture of cad orange and the deeper cad yellow, and I'm going to pull those in and out, leaving a little of those white spaces. And here's where I might want to take a little of that white if I wanted to maybe add a couple on the edges. And I can always go over those with some of my yellow. That's looking good. And then I want to go up here to this petal on this flower and kind of get this edge. to soften everything. I don't want too many hard lines. And let's see, I think it needs just a little more of the deeper color in there. And this one will definitely be wanting the deeper color. And I'll bring a few of those, kind of curve them around. And maybe even bringing a few more up this way. Just deepening that area to push the other petals forward a little bit more. And then softening that in. Nice. This could use just a little bit more of depth at the bottom here. And then on here, bring just a little of the cad yellow light to the edge of this petal here. And it's coming together. So let's finish the little collar, as I've been calling them, on this bud here. And getting that highlight. So I think a few more veins in this flower. This is the cad orange mixed with the red. A little more presence to a few of these. And then in this front petal. And I like to bring some up. I'm kind of curving my way around. And maybe a couple down from the top. Oops, a little too much there. I want to lift some of that. Just a little bit more here. I'm pushing that petal deeper. And I need to make this a little darker, this little turn here. There. And it's coming together. I like it. I'm just going to try and lift a smidgen on this edge here of this deeper color, just to give it a little glow. I'm going to drop a little cat orange in there. And sometimes you start to, look and you start to see a little bit more of the subtleties of your subject and what can make it a little more interesting subject-wise. That's looking good. I think I want a little bit more of this deeper red. In here, let's see if I can just maybe make it just subtly a little deeper. But I might go ahead and just do a couple on either side as well. Bringing that here and there around the edges to give it a little more definition. Not really outlining it per se. I'm going to turn so I can reach some of these more comfortably. If you find those a little too defined, you can always again soften those in. And I'll show you what I mean. So I have some water here. Oh, this was a little too intense, just softening that, and you can blot it. But I think that I like the way that gives it a little more definition. I'm going to just soften a couple of them. I'm just using some water here, and I can just blot it. I'm going to do a little on this bottom. Gives it a little movement, I feel. And we're nearly done, so I'm just going to take a break and give this a good look. So now I feel our project is almost completed. So here is my painting. I see a few things I'd like to add or finish up. And one of the things I want to show you today is, I'm thinking of adding a little more foliage in on this side, and maybe something over here, maybe another bud, or maybe some more foliage. So I have my black and white handout that I can refer to. So let me show you how I would go ahead and do that. So one of the things I'm going to be using is some tracing paper, and I recommend this brand because it's a little more sheer than some of the other ones. And so let's get started on making a few changes. So I'm going to be referring back to my black and white handout. I have my painting, and I'm just going to put that off to the side. And I'm taking just a small scrap piece of my tracing paper and looking around on here, seeing what I might want to trace, so that maybe I could move that over to the other side. Rather than having to redraw anything, I can just use my reference here and make use of that. So I'm liking the shape of this, and I can change it a little. Maybe I want to add maybe one more or two more little fronds on there. But now I have that done in pencil, I'm going to flip it over for this instance and see how I like the way that looks on the other side. So just kind of using that as an example. Maybe I want to see how it looks coming down here, but I think I want a little something more next to the edge of this petal. Let me just show you on my painting because it's pretty light, so I'm feeling it needs just a little more color to set it apart. So I'm thinking that looks good. Now over here I'm thinking of maybe doing another bud, so I can go ahead and trace one of my buds. I'm using my my twist erase. I don't know if you can see that. I love these pencils. I've had this one for probably, I want to say 5 years, and it still has a bit of eraser on it. So tracing this little bud, and I'll put the stem in, and so just taking that, let me see, I'm thinking maybe, yes, I might like that right here on my painting. But I feel like maybe just another little sprig of greenery as well. So let's see what looks good. I'm going to trace this little piece here, and I might change it a little. And maybe I'll add this little piece in as well and just make that the end. Maybe make it a little taller. So I'm looking at bringing that in over here. Oh, sorry, let me do it on the painting. So I could have it behind these little sprigs here, and I like the way it seems to connect with my greenery at the bottom here, so I would just pull that all the way down. And I might be wanting this up a little bit higher. And now that I have my pieces, I can go ahead and take a black marker and go over those, because I'm going to want to go to the light table or the window so I can trace these onto my painting with pencil. And so you want it dark enough so that it will show through your painting. So just the pencil probably wouldn't be enough. So now I can go and trace those on at the window or at the light box. So I have the painting and my tracing on the light box. I've put my tracing underneath and I'm lining it up to where I would like to have it. And I'm just going to lightly trace it onto my painting with my pencil. And I'm making it a little bigger than the tracing that I've made, just because these are fairly large, and since this one's coming towards the front, I feel like it should be a little bigger. And now I'm going to look at this little piece of foliage and see where I might want to bring that in. What's nice is you can just manipulate this to wherever you want to and kind of move it around and see what works best. I think and sometimes you can even turn it over. Sometimes it works better the other way. And I think I liked it better this way. So I'm going to add that in right here next to that bud. And kind of connect it in here. So it worked out that. And I think that just kind of fills in that empty spot there. Now we'll go to the other side here. So I maybe want to angle this a little differently, but I don't want it to necessarily run off the edge of the paper. So I have to find the right angle. Maybe I want this going in the other direction. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to bring that there. And that will fill in that space. I think I'll make this just maybe underneath this piece. And maybe add one more in front. And I feel like maybe I need one more here, just because, again, I'm trying to bring something darker on the edge of this lighter flower. Okay, so now we're ready to put some finishing touches onto our painting. Now I'm ready to get started. I've got my Celadon green here. And I want to drop a little of my green gold in, kind of mix it up. Whoops, well, I'll just make that a little longer. And remember, we all have artistic license. Going back to the Celadon. I filled that. I'm going to take a little of the darker mixture, and that's the Hooker's green with quinacridone gold. Just drop a little of that in here and there. And of course I want to get that little bit of warmth on the tips. And then I'll move over to this bud. So I do tend to start with that celadon color. And I'm going to just go ahead and drop some right into my frond as well. Grabbing a little of the green gold, and I'm going to put that on the side of my bud as well. I always add a little something there. And I feel maybe it needs one more little piece coming off this side. I think that will kind of round it out a little nicer. I'm going to add one more here. Maybe make this one a little bit longer. And then I want the darker green, maybe a little more at the base because of the angle here. And then the warmest tip. Getting that on all my little fronds, and then I will have to add that little collar in later. Whoops, let's see if I can blot that. Just lifting a little on that edge here where it would maybe be a little lighter. And making sure that these are integrated. I have to go back in here to this one. And I feel like I need a little of my dark. And there we go. The other thing I would like to do is maybe bring a few more veins into my flowers, and I'm going to be using some white gouache for that. So wherever I feel it might need a little more definition, like maybe on this edge here. And in fact, I'm going to use my number 1 just to get a thin enough line. And I know I've talked about the fact that this gouache can look great going down and then it will disappear. So, you know, sometimes you have to go over it a couple of times. And I think that just really added a little something there. And maybe up here. And again, if I need to go over that, just here and there. I keep putting my hand in my little bud here, so I see there's a little something in there. Let's see if I can get that out. And I'll probably be glazing over that. I'm going to turn my paper this way. And I don't need too much on this one, just maybe a couple little spaces. Yeah, that looks great. Turn here so I can just get a couple on this edge. And I'm thinking it's a little dark here. I'm going to mix some of the white into my light yellow and just maybe define this edge. See what that brings. Maybe bring some veins to that background. I kind of like that. There, that just gives it a little distance. And you can always bring that in wherever you feel it might be needed. Maybe just a couple back here. And there's some little dark dots in our center here, so I'm going to use some of that really dark green and just drop those in. And it's almost to its completion. I'm going to do my little collar here. I'm not sure that's quite dry enough, but we'll try it. Because I recommend waiting until it's dry. Do as I say, not as I do, as we often indicate. That's looking okay. And again, I can just drop a little extra in the edges there. I have a little paint here I must have put down when I put my hand in that, but look at that. I think we're pretty well completed with our painting today.